On November 26, 1996, Atari's hit Area 51 was finally made available for home consoles, in this case, PlayStation, Sega Saturn, and PC. Up to that point, the only way to play the game was by dispensing quarter after quarter into the cabinet at your local arcade. For many of us who grew up in the 90s, some of our fondest memories of trips to the arcade, at least for those of us lucky enough to grow up near one, contain the classic light gun game, which got us at Geekscape wondering, what games should absolutely be required at every arcade you go to? After many long conversations and some long arguments, we finally settled on a list we're happy with. So grab a roll of quarters and stretch those fingers. I'm Derek of Geekscape Games, and these are the top 10 games every arcade should have. Before we start, if you haven't already, hit subscribe on our channel for pop culture videos every Tuesday and Friday. If you really dig the videos, donate to our Patreon for early access and bonus episodes. It really helps keep the lights on. At number 10, we've got Windjammers. I was first introduced to Windjammers via Windjammers 2 at PAX West 2019. Where its deviously simple and utterly addicting gameplay had my fiancé and I glued to the booth for what felt like hours. It was definitely hours. My fiancé even bought a Windjammers hat, and she never gives a crap about merch. Once we got home, we picked up the Switch port of the original Windjammers arcade game, and we'd go on to spend many nights playing just one more round forever and ever, and yelling insults at each other while we're playing. A couple of years ago, an arcade actually opened up near where we live, and as if it were fate, they eventually brought in a Windjammers machine. Even though we have Windjammers at home, every time we've gone, we've spent far too much of our time at the Windjammers cabinet. It's probably the most fun I've ever had on an arcade machine, and definitely the most fun time you can have playing Frisbee. Actually, I've played a real Frisbee a few times after this, and it's pretty cool too. At number 9, we have Dragon's Lair. After becoming jaded with how Disney's animation division was being run, Don Bluth celebrated his 42nd birthday by taking 12 Disney animators with him to start his own animation company. Their first film, The Secret of NIMH, was a modest success when it released in 1982. However, it was the following year when Bluth released the animation-inspired game Dragon's Lair that he truly began to break new ground. Utilizing Laserdisc, it managed to bypass the usual video game limitations for the time by having the player control Dirk the Daring, who looked and moved like a cartoon character. This was mind-blowing for audiences who had only ever played as pixelated sprites to that point. On the other hand, due to the design of the game, players were mostly just reacting to a fairly predetermined game, focusing on reflexes over actual action. While at first, the expensive machines were thought to be the future of gaming and were predicted to save the dying arcade industry, the game and its follow-ups, Space Ace and Dragon's Lair 2, showed little influence on arcades as a whole, and the gaming system was declared a failure. But it's also one of only 3 games in storage at the Smithsonian. Coming in at number 8, we have The Simpsons. No one could have predicted the impact that The Simpsons would have had on culture when it was released in 1989. Just 2 years later, the first, but far from last, Simpsons video game was released to arcades. The game, which was a classic beat-em-up developed by Konami, finds the Simpson family battling various enemies with household objects in an effort to rescue a kidnapped Maggie. The game was a massive commercial success and ranked as one of the 3 best-selling arcade games in 1981. There are few arcade games that are easy to empty your allowance into than this classic. Coming in at number 7, NBA Jam Tournament Edition. Sports video games have pretty much been popular for as long as video games have existed, but when Midway released NBA Jam in 1993, it captured the attention of athletes and geeks alike. The game of basketball has never been more fun than when you're playing in big head mode, tossing a flaming basketball into the hoop. The release of this game popularized a subgenre of video games with fast, high-action gameplay and an exaggerated realism that carried into games like MLB Slugfest and NFL Blitz. While the 2-on-2 game wouldn't teach you the actual rules of basketball, since it had no fouls, free throws, very limited violations, and frequently defied the laws of physics, it made many 90s kids who'd never watched basketball start cheering for their go-to team. You'd better believe here at Geekscape we are huge fans of the Utah Jazz's Stockton/Malone combo. At number 6, Miss PacMan/Galaga 2-in-1 cabinet. The Miss PacMan and Galaga 2-in-1 cabinet is the peanut butter and jelly of the arcade industry. In 1981, the sequel to Galaxian was released, and Galaga is quickly praised for its addictive nature and innovation. It's considered part of the golden age of arcade gaming and is regarded as one of the greatest video games of all time. A year later, another sequel game was released, this time to Pac-Man. Miss Pac-Man similarly was praised for its innovation and improvements to the original game. It's also regarded as one of the best video games of all time, and it remains one of the most financially successful arcade games of all time. Taking both of these massive sequels and putting them into a single cabinet was a genius idea, and you'd be hard-pressed to go to an arcade or even a dive bar that didn't have this cabinet sitting there just waiting to suck up all your quarters. Number 5, the Addams Family Pinball Machine. The origins of pinball can actually be traced as far back as 1643. From 1940 until 1976, pinball was actually banned due to being labeled as gambling and games of chance. Roger Sharp was responsible for the end of this ban when he appeared in a courtroom to prove that it was a game of skill by playing a machine and successfully calling every shot he made, leading to the end of the ban. From that point on, pinball machines became a staple for arcades. While there were legitimately thousands of machines to choose from, we went with the Addams Family Pinball Machine. Released in 1992, the game quickly became the best-selling pinball game of all time, selling 20,270 units. Almost 30 years since its release, the popularity of the unit has continued to influence pinball machines coming out, even in the past 5 years. At number 4, Area 51. No arcade is complete without a light gun arcade game, but few have left a comparable impact to Area 51. While the game was not well received critically, it became an instant success with kids getting sucked into opening fire on both alien and zombie alien creatures. Long-term players even learn random cheat codes like, hey, did you know if you shoot only the human characters in the opening level of the game, it turns into the aliens' point of view instead? Perhaps it was the growing fascination of aliens in the 90s between Men in Black and the X-Files, or maybe it was the eye-catching art on the cabinet, or maybe even because it's just a damn good game. Area 51 was a major hit, selling over 20,000 cabinets. Number 3 comes Crazy Taxi. There's a ton of driving games that you could choose from for this list, but we went with the one that had the inescapable song blasting out of its speakers 24/7. The main objective had you picking up customers and taking them to their destinations as quickly as possible, but given that it was released during the time of Twisted Metal and Grand Theft Auto and countless other car demolitions games, you got points for pulling off stunts and just narrowly avoiding collision with other vehicles. The punk rock soundtrack was super fitting for the concept, and to this day, the song All I Want takes me right back to my local arcade. Number 2, we have Dance Dance Revolution. We've listed a lot of games on here, but only one made a cultural stamp strong enough to attract the satirical eye of South Park. More contagious than PacMan fever, DDR exploded into the mainstream, both captivating and confusing audiences. There were no mediocre players. You were either trash and avoided the game like a plague, or you wowed audiences with your precision. Geekscape friend Jason Tross has even made a trilogy of post-apocalyptic films, all stemming from his love of the game. Seriously, if you've never seen the FP, do it. Before we get to our number 1, a quick honorable mention to Donkey Kong, the arcade game that gave us 3 of the most iconic video game characters of all time and one of the greatest documentaries ever made. At number 1, we have Marvel vs. Capcom 2. There's so many good fighting games to choose from. Tekken 2, Street Fighter Turbo, Mortal Kombat, Power Stone, all of them seem like good options, but from the beginning, this had to be our number 1 pick. Marvel vs. Capcom dropped at a time when every kid who was into gaming was also watching the Marvel cartoons on Saturday morning television. The idea that characters from our favorite games could get into fisticuffs with members of the X-Men felt groundbreaking. Little did we know that a few years later, when we got the sequel, we were seeing the fighting game to end all fighting games. 20 plus years since its original release, and it's still considered the best fighting game of all time. Praise has been heaped onto the game on a yearly basis, but its positive vibes don't just stop at critical adoration. The game was a juggernaut financially as well. When the game was eventually ported to PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 managed to sell over 1.4 million units over a decade since its original release. If that doesn't say something about its long-lasting impact on arcade culture, I don't know what will. So that's our list, but let us know what games you think we forgot so we can add them to our list of things to buy when we successfully open the Geekscape Arcade. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on any future videos. See you next time.